How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to just look at an article by former Prime Minister, ultra-globalist Kevin Rudd. He's weighing in on the Brexit issue. You can see him here with his little scrunched up face, and the title is "Think the Commonwealth Can Save Brexit Britain? That's utter delusion. Dun dun dun." If Britain proceeds with giving effect to what future historians will legitimately describe as the longest suicide note in history, wrong. They'll describe it as one of the wisest things Britain ever did by leaving the Union. The cold, hard reality is that the mathematics simply don't stack up in terms of credible economic alternatives to Europe. What you're going to see here is an economic fallacy that he pushes, but the thing is, Kevin Rudd is a globalist, so he's going to use any lie that he can in order to justify keeping Britain in the corrupt European Union. So let's just see what his reasoning is. Much as any Australian, Canadian and New Zealand governments of whichever persuasion would do whatever they could to frame new free trade agreements with the UK, the bottom line is that 65 million of us do not come within a bull's roar of Britain's adjacent market of 450 million Europeans. Two whopping fallacies in that sentence there. Firstly, that all of a sudden, after a Brexit, European firms are not going to want to sell their goods and services to Britain. And conversely, that European firms are not going to buy what Britain has to offer simply because they're not in a political union. No, once Brexit happens, if there is no deal, then the European Union will be forced to the negotiation table because their companies, the companies that actually control Europe from behind the scenes, will get in their ear and say, you need to negotiate a deal in order for us to sell our goods and services there. It's that simple. The European Union needs Britain more than Britain needs the European Union. The second fallacy is that more people automatically equals a better economy or better trade deals. That is not how an economy works. An economy works by being more productive, producing better goods and services at a lower price. The idea that it's just simply more people is nonsense. But of course, Kevin Rudd, the man who flooded Australia with as many non-European migrants as he possibly could because he has no loyalty to Australia, he would say that, wouldn't he? This is Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister. As for India, obviously he mentions India because they've got a massive population. Good luck. India's trade and commerce bureaucracy is the most mercantilist and outright protectionist in the world. In the same year as Prime Minister of Australia, I launched a free trade negotiation with Delhi. But a decade later, those negotiations remain at a standstill. You see, because he couldn't do it, no one else can. And is the lesson there not simply to be a little bit more protectionist yourself? Perhaps the British government could take more of a focus on the British people and building up the British manufacturing sector and the British economy rather than relying on trade deals and imports and exports. Just a thought there. Maybe they could do that. Instead of shipping all their jobs overseas, maybe they could bring them back to Britain in much the same way that Donald Trump is doing with America. Maybe that's all too hard for these globalist shills. The very best part of this article comes here, so I had to actually leave it in for you to enjoy. Then the Brexiteers turn to that other economic chimera, the US, as final salvation. The irony is that the current wave of nationalism, isolationism and protectionism, ooh, a booga booga, that they so ruthlessly exploited in the Brexit referendum has also been unleashed in the US there. Obviously, a globalist like Kevin Rudd is going to hate the idea of people taking back their national sovereignty. That is not what he wants. That's not his agenda. He's a traitor. He hates his own country. Was a former Prime Minister, mind you. But let's go and see what Donald Trump has to say about this opinion. Donald Trump says US-UK trade will increase very substantially after Brexit as he confirms we are agreeing to move forward. But that's not what Kevin Rudd said, is it? US trade with Britain will rise very substantially after Brexit, President Donald Trump has said. Speaking at the White House today, Trump signaled Washington welcomed a new trade agreement with Britain and said, "We are agreeing to move forward." His comments will be seen as a boost for Brexiteer hopes that Britain's departure from the EU will enable successful free trade deals around the world. Exactly. Why are Britain so reliant on the EU? They're not. They can leave the EU and start negotiating trade agreements with all these other countries. There are plenty of people that would love to trade with Britain. And again, Britain can also boost their own economy and try and bring manufacturing there in order to raise the living standards of their working class, which they seem to have forgotten while they're pushing this globalist rubbish. I had to leave this bit in there just because it shows how clueless and hypocritical Kevin Rudd is. For obvious cultural reasons, practically all Australians like Britain. It's true, but notice how he uses the word cultural there. What he actually means is ethnic and racial. The biggest ethnic group in Australia are people of British heritage. Australia was set up as a British colony for British people. That was the whole point of it. We became sort of a European conglomerate in the end, but ultimately it is a British colony. We are still literally a British colony. We're subject to the Crown. Our head of state is the Queen of England. This little fact is probably lost on treasonous globalists like Kevin Rudd. They want Britain to do well. Yes, we do. They are happy with the idea of allowing their kids to live and work in Britain. Yes, we are. Just as we welcome British kids in Australia. Exactly. We want Britain to do well, which is why we want them to leave the EU. If the American pillar is looking a little shaky, Europe is looking even shakier. The strength of the political emergence of the far right across Europe's four largest economies, Germany, France, Italy and Spain, is frightening for you. The European political centre is being hollowed out. Yeah, it is. All at a time when Europe's economy is once again weakening. And that's before you add the final blow to the solar plexus in the form of Brexit. Isn't that interesting? You see, before he's basically said that Britain needs to stay in the EU for political reasons, or economic reasons, I should say. But all of a sudden he's saying that the EU is essentially crumbling, that the centre is getting hollowed out, that people are going back towards nationalism. Doesn't that mean it's in Britain's best interest to leave? Because the EU is a sinking ship, therefore it's a good idea to go back to your own national sovereignty so you don't go down with the ship? This is classical doublethink from this global communist known as Kevin Rudd. The bottom line is that a European Union without Britain will be a weaker international actor than it has been. Correct! Particularly if the European centre of political gravity increasingly moves in a more populist direction. And there's no sign that that's going to change because people are sick of the globalist agenda. Globalism is eating Europe alive. And people want to take back their national sovereignty, hence Brexit. Kevin Rudd has just pointed out, without a doubt, that the EU needs Britain more than Britain needs the EU. Therefore, should there be a hard Brexit, then the EU will come crawling to Britain for a trade deal. But the irony is lost on Kevin Rudd because he's pushing a globalist agenda. So my appeal to Brits, both Conservative and Labour, is to use this critical fortnight to start turning all this around. For Britain's economic self-interest, as well as the wider political interests of the Western community of nations, Britain should remain in the EU. And there is his agenda. Kevin Rudd, the treasonous globalist who was Prime Minister of Australia and flooded Australia with non-European migrants because he doesn't like this country, obviously, why else would he do it, is telling Britain that they should remain in the EU because made up economic fallacies and he's a globalist, so he wants them to. Kevin Rudd is not someone that anyone with any kind of reasonable, logical, and free-thinking thought process actually listens to. And that is a perfect example of why Australians didn't vote him in when he tried to run the second time. Thanks so much for watching the video. Share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya.